Nominations of Dr. Celeste Wallander to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, Ms. Melissa Dalton to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Activities, and Dr. John Plumb to be the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. I thank the nominees for their long careers of service to the United States and their willingness to assume these important roles. I would also like to welcome the colleagues and family members who are with us today. Dr. Wallander, I welcome your guest, Professor Jeffrey Anderson. Ms. Dalton, I welcome your guest, Jason, and Dr. Plumb, I welcome your parents, John and Marie. Dr. Wallander, you are nominated to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. In this role, you will be the principal advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and the Secretary of Defense on international security issues that relate to Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and Africa. I would note your qualifications and experience for this position, including your roles as President and CEO of the U.S.-Russia Foundation, Senior Director for Russia-Eurasian Affairs on the National Security Council, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia during the Obama administration. If confirmed, there are several challenges that will require your immediate attention. Most pressing is Russia's increasingly aggressive posture on the Ukrainian border. Diplomatic meetings are being held as we speak, but this relationship is likely to remain a point of contention. I would ask that you share your assessment of U.S. and multilateral efforts to train and equip the Ukrainian security forces and what balance the Department should pursue in near-term training and equipping needs and longer-term defensive capability development. Iran also remains a complex challenge for the Department. Even as indirect negotiations to return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, take place in Vienna this month, Iranian-linked proxies continue to mount drone and rocket attacks in the region, including against bases in Iraq and Syria with a U.S. military presence. I look forward to your testimony on how the Department of Defense should respond to Iranian malign influence in the region while preserving our continuing nuclear negotiations. Ms. Dalton, you are nominated to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs. This position is responsible for supervision of the Homeland Defense activities of the Department of Defense, as well as defense support of civil authorities, Arctic and global resilience, and also Western Hemispheric affairs. Your decades of experience, including your current role performing the duties of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities, will serve you well in this position. If confirmed, you will be responsible for integrating the Department of Defense's Homeland Defense activities to include efforts to protect critical infrastructure and assisting in Homeland Defense matters for U.S. Northern Command, other combatant commands, and the National Guard. I'd like to know what you see as the major challenges in the coming years with respect to these issues, including protection of the defense industrial base. Additionally, you will be responsible for policy issues relating to the Western Hemisphere and the Arctic, regions that have seen increased attention from Russia, China, Iran, and other recent actors. I look forward to your testimony on the appropriate role of the Department of Defense in competing strategically in these key regions. Dr. Plumb, you are nominated to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. This is a new position that was established in the fiscal year 2020 National Defense Authorization Act to ensure dedicated policy oversight over the newly created Space Force. You are well qualified for this position, having managed missile defense and space policy issues for the Defense Department during the Obama administration, as well as holding an undergraduate degree in physics and a doctorate in aerospace engineering. As Section 955 of the FY 2020 NDAA outlines, the principal duty of the Assistant Secretary shall be the overall supervision of policy of the Department of Defense for space warfighting. I would highlight the word principal because the Department has undertaken a major reorganization of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and has realigned nuclear, missile defense, countering weapons of mass destruction, and cybersecurity to your space portfolio. Although similar in scope to earlier versions of this position, there are major differences for your office, including the disbanding of the Office of Nuclear and Missile Defense Policy, significant changes to the former Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, and the movement of missile defense to the Office of Space Policy. Furthermore, cybersecurity, with all its complexity, has been added to your plate. During today's hearing, I will ask for your views about this reorganization and your plan to ensure that nuclear deterrence, the bedrock of our national security, is not lost in the shuffle, especially as a new nuclear posture review is imminent and we continue to grapple with serious challenges from China and Russia. Thank you again to our nominees. I look forward to your testimonies. Now let me recognize the ranking member, Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being with us for this session. In 2021, our top military and intelligence leaders told this committee that the world is in the most dangerous and complex position that it has been in our lifetimes, and I agree with that. Looking at what's happening across the world, you have to agree. In 2018, the National Defense Strategy, there's our book. It served us very well as a blueprint. It provides a roadmap to prioritize the security of the challenge. And I know that they're going to be redoing this and upgrading it and all that, and I hope that we don't lose the value that it's been to us before, because it's truly a masterpiece. We have a lot of challenges and areas would oversee me. China's military modernization continues at an alarming pace, and the massive growth in its arsenal of nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles clearly shows that they're watching an unprecedented strategy breakout. Russia has built up well over 100,000 troops around Ukraine and is ready for yet another invasion if Putin gives the word. Russia also recently tested an anti-satellite missile, creating a cloud of lethal debris that made astronauts scramble for safety. This again shows Putin's blatant disregard for established norms. Meanwhile, Iran continues to fund global terrorism and target American personnel and partners, and rampant inflation is eating away at the defense budget. Not only our troops pay and the benefits, but also funding for training, maintenance, and weapons acquisition. This administration seems unable or unwilling to effectively respond to growing dangers, and this paralysis damages U.S. credibility and undermines the trust of our partners and allies. Even now, the administration seems intent on upending decades-long security guarantees by watering down our United States nuclear policies and exposing allies. And I'll have a chance to pursue this a little bit during my time for questioning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Inhofe. And now let me recognize Dr. Wallander for her testimony. Doctor?
Good morning, Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as you consider my nomination to serve as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. I am grateful to President Biden, Secretary Austin, and Undersecretary Call for their trust in my ability to serve in this role. It is a privilege to appear on this panel with colleagues who have also been nominated for Assistant Secretary roles. If confirmed, it would be my honor to work alongside them and ensure coordination between the regional and functional policy offices within the department. I would like to take a moment to thank my dad, who served in the U.S. Navy and is a retired Chicago police officer, and my mom, who immigrated to the United States as a little girl from Europe after World War II. They taught me the gift of American citizenship and the duty to serve our country. I also thank my husband, Jeff, and our children, Nathaniel, Joseph, and Genevieve, for their unshakable love and support. I am humbled by the prospect of returning to public service. I served at the Pentagon as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia from 2009 to 2012, and then on the National Security Council staff as the Senior Director for Russia and Central Asia from 2013 to 2017. These roles equipped me with the skills to manage critical defense relationships, navigate the interagency policy formation process, and develop national security policy in response to complex geopolitical contexts. I have dedicated my career to both studying and working policy on European and Eurasian security, with a focus on Russian foreign, military, and security affairs. If confirmed, I would work to utilize my scholarly and government experiences in the service of U.S. national security. The Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs covers a broad portfolio that includes well over 100 countries. ISA develops security policy and manages defense and military relations. It stewards department resources to develop military capabilities, support security cooperation programs, conduct foreign military sales, and perform other key activities in those regions. I would be honored to lead the talented professionals supporting this vast portfolio should I be confirmed. The regional portfolio presents some of the most difficult defense challenges facing the United States. I appreciate that members of this committee are closely tracking Russian threats against Ukraine. As a private citizen, I have been deeply concerned about Russian military concentrations. If confirmed, I would develop policy and strategic options for the Secretary to deter Russia, ensure appropriate response to Russian aggression, and safeguard U.S. and transatlantic security. I support the Biden administration's work to unite NATO on deterrence and diplomacy, as well as provide continued defensive lethal assistance to Ukraine. I also support the administration's close consultations with European allies and partners on options for deterrence, as well as serious consequences for Russia in the event of escalation. If confirmed, I will be ready and able to advance the department's preparations for all contingencies. This will be my top priority if confirmed, and I would immediately focus on being briefed in detail about the current state of play. I share the goals and commitments advanced in the Global Posture Review, including an effective counterterrorism posture in the Middle East and robust deterrence against Iran. Our force protection mission is also essential, particularly in the face of attacks by Iranian proxies in Iraq. If confirmed, I will also advance our strategy in Africa to build partner capacity, strengthen African security institutions, and counter violent extremist organizations. I share Secretary Austin's view that China is the pacing challenge for the department. I also share his view that the strength of our alliances and partnerships is one of our greatest assets in that challenge and all others. If confirmed, I will prioritize these critical defense partnerships in order to strengthen our security and deter our adversaries. The responsibilities of international security affairs require thoughtful and sustained military diplomacy with our allies and partners across the globe. I know that members of this committee recognize the importance of this mission, and I am personally invested in working with Congress to address these shared challenges and opportunities. I appreciate your long-standing bipartisan approach to national security issues and would look forward to working in partnership with this committee and consulting regularly with Congress if confirmed. Thank you for considering my nomination, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dalton, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and members of the committee, it is an honor to be considered as President Biden's nominee for Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs. I am grateful to President Biden, Secretary Austin, Deputy Secretary Hicks, and Undersecretary Call for their trust and confidence in me. I wish to thank my family, friends, and mentors for their encouragement, particularly my husband and true north, Jason, who's here today, my two amazing children, Jacob and Isabel, and my parents, Ann and Ravi. My father chose to make this country his own as an immigrant from India. He and my mother imbued within me a deep respect for the foundational values of our great nation. I come from a family committed to public service and have been drawn to it since I was 22 years old. I am honored by the prospect of serving in this new capacity. I began my career at the Defense Department as a civil servant during the Bush administration and served for a decade in several policy and intelligence roles. I then spent 6 years at the bipartisan think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I was honored to return to OSD policy last January as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities as a member of the Biden-Harris administration. If confirmed, I would bring my experience as a defense leader, thinker, and practitioner to the position. As Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs, I would look forward to advancing enduring department priorities and new focus areas such as Arctic security and climate policy, if confirmed. My office would prioritize issues that impact our homeland defense as the department's #1 priority. If confirmed, my priority would be defeating the COVID-19 pandemic, which remains the most immediate threat to U.S. national security and to the health, safety, and readiness of our service members. In addition, if confirmed, I would ensure DoD maintains resilience to execute our most critical national security functions and to provide continuity to other parts of government in the face of all hazard threats. The resilience of our critical infrastructure and capabilities at home strengthens deterrence of potential adversary aggression and enables a robust foreign policy abroad. If confirmed, I would ensure DoD's unparalleled and flexible capacity is leveraged effectively and appropriately in support of federal, state, and local leadership, law enforcement, public health, and emergency management. Under the updated OSD policy organization, Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs will also focus on Arctic security and global resilience. The Arctic is a complex theater of growing strategic importance. I appreciate this committee's leadership in prioritizing this region. In addition, as Secretary Austin has stated, to keep the nation secure, we must tackle the existential threat of climate change. Climate change already touches most of what the department does, and this threat will continue to have implications for U.S. national security. Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs is also the office from which DoD supports civil authorities responding to extreme weather events, including wildfires and hurricanes. If confirmed, I would provide oversight of these distinct but also interrelated issues as part of a whole-of-government approach. If confirmed, my office would unite policymaking on both sides of the southwest border, bringing our defense relationships with Central and South American neighbors under the same policy oversight umbrella as our support to the Department of Homeland Security and local partners on the border. This organization will help us make better and more holistic policy across these issues to address the drivers of migration and effects in the homeland as part of a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach. More broadly, if confirmed, I would seek to forge even deeper bonds with our Western Hemisphere neighbors based on principles of mutual respect and equality and a commitment to economic prosperity, security, human rights, and dignity. On the many issues in this portfolio, DoD plays a critical supporting role to other departments and agencies. If confirmed, I am committed to making sure that DoD supports civil authorities to the best of our ability without compromising DoD's core missions and warfighting readiness. I would also focus on building relationships and trust across government and reinforcing the strong tradition of healthy civil-military relations in the department and in our democracy to do this job as effectively as possible if confirmed. I have deep appreciation for this committee and its role in the formation and oversight of our national security policy. If confirmed, I commit to consulting with you regularly to advance our nation's priorities in an active, bipartisan, and cooperative spirit together. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Plumb, please.
Thank you, Senator. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, members of the committee, thank you. I'm both proud and humbled to be testifying before you today. I've always admired and respected the thoughtful, bipartisan work of this committee. I'd like to thank President Biden, Secretary Austin, and Deputy Secretary Hicks for their trust in me and in my ability to continue to serve the nation if confirmed as the first Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. I'd like to thank also my parents who are here today, and my brothers and sisters, and my wife and kids for their love and support that allows me to be here before you. And being here is indeed an honor. I grew up in rural Western New York in a family for whom service to country is a proud tradition. Both of my grandfathers were in the Army Air Corps in World War II. My father was in the Army for the first 4 years of my life, at Fort Richardson in Alaska. I have a brother and a sister who served in the Air Force, and as for me, I joined the Navy and became a submarine officer. Since leaving active duty, I've remained active in the Navy Reserves for 2 decades. As a civilian, I served in these very halls as the military advisor to Senator Ken Salazar. I've served in the Pentagon, and I've served on the National Security Council staff. If confirmed, I believe my lifetime of service has prepared me to better advance and defend U.S. national security interests and to work with this committee while doing so. The ASD for Space policy position appropriately elevates the space portfolio within the policy organization. If confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee to ensure space receives the attention, the prioritization, and the resources this critical domain demands. Space, nuclear weapons, missile defenses, cyber, and the ability to detect and stop the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction are all key to U.S. national security. And the integration of these capabilities is essential for the era of strategic competition the U.S. must now rise to meet. As members of this committee are well aware, the security environment facing the United States at this moment in history is a challenging one. Secretary Austin has articulated that China is the pacing challenge to the department, and China's behavior with its own strategic capabilities is a matter of grave concern. From its kinetic anti-satellite weapon test in 2007 that created a persistent debris cloud, to the uncontrolled re-entry of a rocket stage last May, China has yet to demonstrate that it is a responsible spacefaring nation. In the cyber domain, the growing pace and scale of cyber attacks from China far exceeds the bounds of traditional statecraft. The commander of U.S. Strategic Command has expressed concern that China's nuclear forces are in the midst of a strategic breakout. Reports of a hypersonic glide vehicle test in August via fractional orbit bombardment system, if true, are deeply troubling. And maybe most troublesome of all is China's near total lack of transparency regarding its strategic capabilities and its demonstrated unwillingness to discuss them. Russia also continues to present a challenge on multiple fronts. Russian activities in space, including its destructive ASAT test just this November, are an ongoing concern. And Russia's reliance on and integration of nuclear weapons throughout its forces, from the tactical to strategic, is troubling. Russian cyber activity includes state tolerance of cyber criminals and state-sponsored weaponization of social media. And amid all these problems, North Korea continues to expand its nuclear arsenal and delivery systems, while Iran's uranium enrichment presents both a nuclear proliferation and a security challenge. I understand the department is diligently working to strengthen our deterrence posture, modernizing our nuclear deterrent, modernizing our infrastructure, improving our cyber defenses and capabilities, and working to protect and defend our interests not just on Earth but in space. If confirmed, I will work to continue these efforts while seeking to incorporate our allies as fully as possible. I firmly believe our allies provide a mutual strategic advantage that neither China nor Russia can ever hope to match. I believe the U.S. is at its strongest and best when national security is a bipartisan effort, and that, as the old adage goes, politics really should stop at the water's edge. If confirmed, that is how I intend to approach this position and its attendant responsibilities, and if confirmed, I commit to working closely with this committee to ensure U.S. national security interests are advanced and defended. Thank you once more for inviting me to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I have a series of standard questions which civilian nominees must respond to. You may answer together. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes.
Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
Yes.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dalton, it was just announced this morning that the President and Secretary Austin have directed the deployment of approximately 1,000 military medical personnel to several states, including the state of Rhode Island, to provide support with the Omicron variant proliferation. One of your responsibilities, as you've indicated, is to coordinate the support such as this to states, to localities, to Northern Command, et cetera. Are you concerned about the strain that the Defense Support to Civil Authorities is placing on our active forces and also our National Guard?
Senator, thank you for the question. This terrible pandemic, unfortunately, has taken countless lives over the last 2 years, and it is the most immediate threat to the United States and Americans. And so I believe that the National Guard has played a really important role in supporting local medical authorities and in the development and production of vaccines. If confirmed, I would look forward to building upon these efforts to support civil authorities as appropriate. But as you indicated, Senator, an important element of determining the appropriate use of the DISCA authority is looking towards warfighting readiness. And the Secretary has made clear that the #1 pacing challenge for the department is China. So I would look forward to applying that framework if confirmed.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wallander, you are being nominated for a very critical position at the moment because of the situation on the Ukrainian border. But you were, I believe, in the White House on the National Security Council in 2014 when Russia moved into the Crimea and the Donbass. Can you reflect about how those experiences will shape or help your response and your analysis of these issues?
Senator, thank you for your focus on this critical issue for American and allied national security at this time. Russia has proven itself to be willing and able to use multiple instruments in pursuit of its national security goals, including preventing Ukraine from continuing the path of its Euro-Atlantic aspirations. I believe that the lessons of 2014 were that the United States needs to be first and foremost unified with our allies and partners, not only in Europe, but globally, in order to provoke a unified front to the Kremlin and make them understand that they cannot divide us. And the second lesson would be to rapidly develop ways to impose costs on the Russian leadership and to support Ukraine in defense of its territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Thank you. Dr. Plumb, the office you're nominated to lead is nearly identical to the Office of Global Strategic Affairs, which was abolished in 2014, except that the Office of Nuclear and Missile Defense Policy has now been abolished, with the Nuclear Policy Mission being merged into an Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, now renamed Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Policy. If confirmed, and given our circumstances, Russia and China, can you use this new arrangement to maintain our critical strategic deterrence policy? And in that response, why did we need such a reorganization?
Thank you very much, Senator. Just from the top, let me just say our nuclear deterrence mission is absolutely critical. Secretary Austin has called it the Department of Defense's #1 priority. I fully agree with that assessment. And if confirmed, I will work to ensure that our nuclear deterrent is safe, strong, effective, and credible. As for the ability to maintain the offices, so inside this Office of Secretary of Defense for Policy, in my experience, there are individual offices. The offices move as a unit. So the Nuclear Weapons Policy Office remains intact. It is now merged with the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office. I think there's actually some advantage to having those two offices in the same, underneath the same DASD ship, because it requires them to coordinate with each other and be aware of each other at a level that perhaps they weren't in previous organizations. The logic to the reorg, I guess I would say I think there is a good logic to it. I think the functional aspects of the Department of Defense need to be integrated as we approach the adversaries, and our near-peer adversaries are the same in all domains, China and Russia. And so for that, I think there is good logic in making sure that those plans and approaches are integrated. The adversary clearly sees us as a whole and not stovepiped.
Thank you very much. Senator Inhofe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question for each one of the witnesses, and so I'm going to ask for real fast responses and try to get to all three of them. In fact, we will get to all three of them. Dr. Plumb, 5 of my colleagues and I recently sent a letter to senior administration officials expressing concern that President Biden might pursue changes to a longstanding U.S. nuclear declaratory policy, despite increasingly aggressive moves by China and Russia and clear objections that we've had from our allies. Deputy Secretary Hicks agreed with our conclusion at her confirmation hearing, stating, "I don't believe that a no first use policy is in the best interest of the United States." Do you agree?
Senator, thank you. I agree with Deputy Secretary Hicks. I personally do not believe no first use is a good idea at this time, and I would say taking the allies into consideration is absolutely essential. My caveat here, of course, is declaratory policy is the purview of the president.
Well, yeah, because I think when it was pretty specific, when she said, "I don't believe no first use policy is in the best interest of the United States." I thank you very much. Dr. Wallander, China is aggressively modernizing its military and expanding its presence around the world, and in particular true in Africa. I can remember it wasn't too long ago we didn't even have an AFRICOM, and the continent was divided into 3 different commands. That was not workable. We did correct that, so we've gotten a lot more attention. However, China is becoming a lot more aggressive in Djibouti and other areas in there. General Townsend called the #1 global power competition concern. This has been a concern of mine for a long period of time, even at the time that we started its own dedicated command. But nonetheless, the problem is still there, and we don't. AFRICOM does not have the capabilities and the resources to actually address this. And I think that is a problem. Do you agree that it's a problem that we lack resources in taking care of the needs that we have in our allies in that continent?
Senator, thank you for your focus on the issue of Chinese and Russian strategic competition active in Africa. I share your concern. If confirmed, look forward to building on the existing defense and security partnerships we have with countries in Africa, and I believe it and agree with you that we need to look at the resources, especially as China has pivoted towards seeking military access and presence.
Well, all the way down through, and that's true. And I may come back if I have a minute, but regardless, I look forward to visiting with you with regularity on this subject. Ms. Dalton, the year 2021 witnessed the surge in illegal southwest border crossings, and the Border Patrol recorded 174,000 encounters with illegal immigrants in November. It was a record for that month. President Biden and his spokesperson have both referred to this as a crisis, and I believe that I agree that it is a crisis. I'd like to ask if you agree that it is a crisis that we're facing right now on our southwest border.
Senator, thank you for highlighting this challenge, and I agree with you that it is a serious situation on the southwest border. And if confirmed, I would look forward to working as part of an interagency effort, both in the Homeland context, working closely with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice to address the challenge, and then also working very closely with our Central and South American partners upstream to address some of the drivers of migration. I think.
So
yep.
That's fine. So you agree it is a crisis?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Let me begin by congratulating each of our nominees on and thanking you for your willingness to serve. I would like to begin with you, Dr. Plumb. I chair the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Subcommittee, and I've supported the effort to transition the civil space situational awareness from the Space Force's 30th Space Wing to the Department of Commerce. Unfortunately, I have to say the transition has been challenged by a lack of clarity on the cost of that mission. There has not been a willingness on the part of the agency to be forthcoming on the cost, and that puts us in a really difficult position with respect to how much money we need to try and appropriate for the Department of Commerce. So if confirmed, will you commit to working with me to improve the Department of Defense's transparency on this issue so that we can better make that transition and ensure that the funding is there that's going to be needed?
Senator, thank you for that question. I think space traffic management is absolutely essential, and I do agree that it should be conducted by a civil agency and not Department of Defense, and I will commit to you to work to help discover the right amount of resources and training and opportunities needed to make that shift. It is a difficult shift, but I think it's needed.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wallander, in your article, NATO's Enemies Within, you stated that NATO actually faces new vulnerabilities as we see some of its recent members that are drifting towards authoritarianism. Hungary is the one that comes most to mind. But that gives Russia more insights into what's happening at NATO at a very critical time. So can you talk about what your role might be and what the appropriate role of the Department of Defense ought to be as we look at what's happening with some of those countries in NATO?
Senator, thank you for reading my article, and thank you for highlighting the importance of NATO as a military alliance, but a military alliance of democratic countries. The strength of NATO lies in the defense and military capabilities of its members, but also the quality of its democratic governance of its members. And it is in that regard, if confirmed, I would focus on, as the Defense Department does in its security and defense partnerships with allies and partners, issues of democratic governance, civilian control of the military, and the strong bond of NATO allies that is part of what keeps it strong and, as you note, limits the influence of Russian corrupt political and business relationships.
And would you agree that right now, given Russia's threat to Ukraine, that that's particularly critical? It was disappointing to hear the readout from the meeting yesterday that Russia was suggesting that because we're not willing to give them a veto threat over who joins NATO, that that is going to, sounded like it encourages them to think about invading Ukraine.
Senator, I very much share your concern at Russian threats and statements, and I think that we see the efforts of Russia to prevent another aspirant country, Ukraine, which seeks that democratic Euro-Atlantic future, and Russia leverages not just military capabilities, but political and economic influence to try to prevent that from happening. And if confirmed, I will focus on, again, not just defense relationships and capabilities, but the quality of the democratic transitions and governance.
Thank you very much. This question is really both for you and for Ms. Dalton. As you know, the Syrian Democratic Forces have stated that they're not able to take long-term responsibility for ISIS detainees and for the camps that currently house so many of the families of those ISIS detainees. And the one in Syria, Al-Hol, comes most to mind, with 60,000 women and children who are family members of ISIS fighters, and most assessments of what's happening there suggest that that camp is a hotbed for radicalization of the family members who are there. So do you believe that addressing the plight of those detainees in Syria should be included in strategic planning processes as we're looking at how we continue to address potential threats from terrorism? Ms. Dalton, I'll ask you to respond first.
Senator, thank you for highlighting this concern. It is an issue that I focused on in my prior affiliation with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Certainly, in my present position, I do believe that we need to be looking at both the security and the humanitarian facets of this challenge set, and I'm sure that that is the approach that my colleagues working counterterrorism and humanitarian affairs in the department and the interagency are taking. Thank you.
And do you agree with that, Dr. Wallander?
Senator, I fully agree with what Ms. Dalton said. I agree it is a combined security challenge and humanitarian problem that we have to take seriously and work through a whole of government approach to resolve.
Thank you. Hopefully we will see an ISIS detainee coordinator appointed, as this committee and the NDAA in 2020 requested. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheen. Senator Wicker, please.
Thank you very much. To our first witness, Doctor, how should we pronounce your last name?
Senator, however you like, but Wallander.
All right. Okay. Well, Dr. Wallander, you served in the administration as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia Policy of 2009 to 2012. Very hot issue. And then you moved over as Senior Director for Russia and Central Asia from 2013 to 2017, which means you were right there when Russia invaded the sovereign nation of Ukraine. Do you think our policy in response to that invasion at the time was correct?
Senator, thank you for highlighting this extremely important question, and I share your concern about this long track record of Russian aggression against its neighbors, including Ukraine. I believe that our response in 2014 was too slow and too incremental, and if confirmed, I would apply the lessons that I learned, and I believe others in the U.S. national security community learned, to better address Russia's ongoing and heightened aggression against its neighbors.
I would go farther than you. You say it was too slow and too incremental. We really didn't provide them with any lethal weapons for quite a period of time. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
And I noticed in answer to an earlier question, you talk about a unified approach with Europe and imposing costs. I do think I understand you to say that providing lethal weapons to Ukraine would also be part of your approach, your recommended approach to the president. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that is correct.
Let me ask you, I appreciate the question that the distinguished senator from Oklahoma asked about no first use. Do you think Russia would have invaded Ukraine in 2014 if they had retained their nuclear capability rather than giving it up after the breakdown of the breakup of the Soviet Union?
Senator, I think a full answer to your question would depend on the trajectory of how Ukrainian security and defense forces maintain control and modernization of those forces. And I think we have to count concerns about proliferation in our assessment of that trajectory. But I believe that that was the correct course of action to support nonproliferation at the time, and the focus, if confirmed, of our security and defense cooperation that I would support would be Ukraine's conventional defense capabilities and the enablers it needs to be able to counter the enormous Russian threat.
I think, Dr. Wallander, we all thought that at the time. President Zelensky, the overwhelmingly elected president of this sovereign nation of Ukraine, is in support of a cruise initiative that the Senate may vote on today, which would impose sanctions on Russian entities associated with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It is a fact that Vladimir Putin has amassed some 100,000 plus or minus Russian troops on the border of this sovereign Ukrainian nation. Is that correct?
Senator, that's correct, and I would add...
So they have taken a very aggressive action. And does it seem to you advisable to take the advice of the person who is in the hottest of hot seats, and that is the president of this sovereign nation, and say, let's go ahead and respond to this very aggressive action?
Senator, I'm not fully aware of the proposal that you are referring to, but I agree that the United States needs multiple elements in its toolkit to include sanctions, to include continued and probably enhanced defensive lethal assistance to Ukraine, and to look at NATO posture in Eastern Europe in order to defend and deter against Russian aggression.
Hope we can do that. Do you think adding 2 destroyers based in Rota to the 4 that we already have would also be an effective deterrent to Russia's aggressive ambitions?
Senator, I am not briefed on intelligence assessments, but I will say from my understanding of publicly available information that the Russian presence and activities in the Black Sea, in particular, are of significant concern. And if confirmed, I would want to look at the U.S. naval presence and posture along the lines of what you suggest.
If you could supplement that answer on the record, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I join in thanking all of you for your service, your previous service, and your willingness to serve in the future. Ms. Wallander, I'd like to continue the conversation you were having with Senator Wicker. Have there been indications, so far as you're aware, in, let's say, the last week, of increasing mobilization at various points by the Russian military in possible preparation for an invasion?
Senator, I'll repeat, as a private citizen, I don't have access to classified assessments. However, I have been tracking the public information available on the matters that you raise, and it is my understanding there are some signs of continuing Russian redeployment of forces from east in the country further west, and that is a matter of considerable concern, not just forces, but heavy armored forces.
So there are some indications that this situation may be coming to a head.
There is plenty of reason to assess, Senator, that it is certainly not de-escalating, and it may be escalating.
Do you think that the United States has sent sufficient arms, particularly Javelin, anti-armor weaponry, Stinger anti-aircraft weaponry? Do you think that we can make clearer not only our strong support for Ukraine, but also provide the very specific weaponry needed by Ukraine to defend itself?
Senator, thank you for focusing on Ukraine's defense needs to counter the Russian aggression. And I would like to thank this committee and the Senate, actually in a bipartisan manner over many years, to support Ukraine's defensive capabilities, because Ukraine is in a much stronger position to be able to resist and fight against a Russian invasion should it happen. to answer your question specifically, I think those are the kinds of capabilities in this heightened threat environment that, if confirmed, I would want to look at in order to enable Ukraine to deal with this escalation of Russian capability that we have discussed.
I assume that you want to do more than look at it, because time is not on our side here. I hope that you would urge as imminently as possible, in fact, even before your confirmation perhaps, that the United States take more aggressive and strong action to bolster Ukrainian defenses with radar systems, with the Javelin anti-armor missiles, with Stinger and other anti-aircraft missiles, and other capability that will show Vladimir Putin that we mean business, because in my view, that's the only sign that he will respect, other than strong economic sanctions.
Senator, I agree with you. Those are core requirements that Ukraine needs in the face of the force that Russia has amassed.
Let me ask you on a different topic, Ms. Wallander. The United States, in its withdrawal from Afghanistan, promised, in fact, the president himself promised, that we would not leave behind our at-risk Afghan allies who have stood by us over the 20 years of war and now have targets on their back. Many of them are in hiding. They are desperate, in dire straits, particularly during the approaching winter. Has the United States done enough to enable those at-risk Afghan allies to evacuate? Shouldn't we be doing more?
Senator, I share your concern deeply with what we've seen and the fact that the United States was not able, along with our allies and partners who stepped up and really supported the effort to evacuate and provide safe haven for those individuals. If confirmed, I commit to you that I will participate with my interagency colleagues and with colleagues at the Defense Department to ensure that we are doing everything possible to assist those individuals and to find them safe haven and exit from Afghanistan if they desire.
Thank you for that answer. I'll look forward to submitting some additional questions for the record on this topic. My time has expired, but I welcome your commitment to do everything possible. Right now, our country is doing far less than everything possible, and I hope that we will step up our efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before turning to my questions, I would like to speak to some of my colleagues' concerns about changes to our declaratory policy that this administration is reportedly considering. I think it's important to remember that the Obama administration rejected these changes in a far more benign security environment than what we are currently seeing today. With China's nuclear breakout and Russia massing forces on Ukraine's border, adopting a no first use or sole purpose policy would be irresponsible, and it would strain relations with our allies at the worst possible moment. As Senator Blumenthal just said, we must show that we mean business. That's what President Putin respects, and that applies in this area as well. Dr. Plumb, in your response to the committee's advanced policy questions about establishing norms of behavior in space, you acknowledge that Russian and Chinese behavior clearly demonstrates that the prospect of establishing an effective agreement is not realistic at this time. Do you support a dual-track approach that involves deploying the capabilities
agreement with Russia and China on that in some not too distant future? At the same time, nothing there would, in my mind, prevent us or preclude us from pursuing both offensive and defensive capabilities to ensure that we can defend our own assets and prevail in a conflict.
Thank you. Also, can you talk about how you view the relationship between nuclear modernization and arms control? Sometimes you see these represented as competing priorities, and I view them instead as complementary, because without modernization, our forces will become obsolete and our adversaries will have no incentive to negotiate for any kind of reductions. So what is your view on that?
Thanks again, Senator. As we discussed at our phone call, I am fully on board with modernizing the nuclear triad. I think it's absolutely essential that our nuclear deterrent, which is the bedrock of our deterrence, is safe, effective, and I would say credible. And I think modernization is part of that credibility. As far as the relationship with arms control is important. It is not, we don't do arms control to its own end. Arms control is to advance the national security of both or as many parties are involved in the talks. And I agree with your assessment that if you have nothing to trade, there is no incentive to be at the table.
Thank you. Dr. Wallander, over the weekend, several reports suggested the administration was considering cutting U.S. presence in Europe as a bargaining chip in the upcoming negotiations with Russia. And in response, the White House issued a statement explicitly rejecting this, stating, quote, "The administration is not weighing cuts to troops in Europe," end quote. I assume you agree with this and would recommend against cutting U.S. presence in Europe. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, I do agree and would so recommend if confirmed.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Rono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the nominees. I asked the following two initial questions of all nominees before any of the committees on which I sit. So I'd like to ask you these two questions en masse. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
No. Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
I have a question for Dr. Wallander. Last year, the U.S., Australia, and the U.K. entered into an historic security alliance, the AUKUS, which includes plans to provide Australia with technology and support to build a nuclear-powered submarines within the next few decades. Additionally, this alliance will facilitate the sharing of many more technologies, including artificial intelligence, underwater systems, long-range strikes, cyber, and many others. These types of agreements lead to enhanced interoperability and deepen cooperation among allies in the region. From your perspective, how important are security alliances like AUKUS to U.S. national defense, and how will this alliance benefit U.S. security interests in the Indo-PACOM AOR?
Senator, I admire and fully support the development of AUKUS as a multilateral alliance for coping with the challenge of China in the Indo-Pacific specifically. I would note that because the UK is one of the members of that alliance, it is a great example of how Europe can join with the United States and regional country, Australia, to cope with Indo-Pacific challenges, including China. And I hope it's the first, only the first instance of Europe taking seriously and contributing to coping with the China challenge.
I agree with you that the cooperation or the inclusion of UK in this kind of alliance that is much more, a focus, I suppose, on China as a near-peer competitor to us is very significant, because we are all in this together, and it's not just what's going on in Europe and what Russia is doing with regard to Ukraine and whatever intentions Russia has. These two countries are definitely our near-peer competitors. Now, you will oversee security cooperation programs and defense strategies impacting many regions across the globe. Can you tell me how you would approach these tasks?
Senator, Thank you for focusing on this important question. If confirmed, I would focus first on building on already existing strong alliances and allied relations and partnerships, which I want to highlight, we enjoy not only in Europe, but in Eurasia, with countries such as Georgia, and in Africa and in the Middle East. So there is plenty of opportunity to build upon and expand as we cope with multiple challenges, not just Russia and China, but ongoing needs in the region such as Iran and countering violent extremism in many regions.
Not to mention North Korea. So I do have a question for Ms. Dalton. In the last week, North Korea has tested 2 ballistic missiles off their east coast. If confirmed, a key part of your responsibilities will include developing policy and planning for homeland defense. In 2019, Missile Defense Review identified the Homeland Defense Radar Hawaii as a requirement for detecting and discriminating against inbound missile threats from an increasingly capable North Korea. In successive budget requests, funding was zeroed out for HDRH Hawaii without any capability to replace it. If confirmed, how will you support policy to ensure Hawaii is protected from missile threats from North Korea and elsewhere going forward?
Senator, thank you for highlighting this concern. Insofar as missile defense of the homeland, it is a central area of focus for the ongoing missile defense review that Secretary Austin and senior defense officials are currently conducting. If confirmed, I would look forward to implementing the findings of the MDR to ensure that the entirety of the U.S. homeland and its territories are protected from threats such as from North Korea.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it is a continuing concern that the administration zeroes out Homeland Defense Hawaii without any alternative. I am totally open to any other ways that Hawaii can be protected, and until then, you will know that I will continue to push for HDRH. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Cotton, please.
Ms. Wallander, you testified that you think President Obama's administration made mistakes in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea and its annexation. You also say in both your opening statement and in question 97 of the advanced questions for the record that you support the continued provision of defensive weapon systems to Ukraine. By that, do you mean to rule out the possibility of providing Ukraine with offensive weapon systems?
Senator, thank you. That is a very good question, because defense assistance needs to be properly focused on the requirements of the partner or ally. I am not read into classified assessments about the balance of offensive and defensive capabilities that would be appropriate for Ukrainian defense needs. But I will say that I would not rule them out. I would want to, if confirmed, be fully briefed on Russia's capabilities and the threat it poses and Ukraine's requirements, and take a comprehensive look at what is necessary for Ukraine to be able to defend its territory and its sovereignty.
Okay, so you don't want to rule out the potential for ever providing Ukraine offensive weapons. You just don't want to make a definitive statement on it until confirmed and read into the intelligence and the situation on the ground.
I think it would be, Senator, irresponsible to speculate without having full access to the classified information and assessments.
I understand and appreciate that. Would you consider air defense artillery systems, the kind of systems that could protect Ukraine against all those Russian helicopters that are on its border, to be offensive or defensive weapon?
I believe air defense systems to be fundamentally defensive in nature, Senator.
Okay, if Russia decides to go for the jugular and you've got Russian tanks and armored personnel carriers rolling across Ukraine's borders, it'd be nice for Ukraine to have artillery systems to strike those forces while they're still on Russian soil, wouldn't it?
Senator, I agree with you.
Okay. Artillery, that kind of artillery you'd characterize as an offensive weapon, correct?
Senator, I would.
I would.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that what becomes important is how such capabilities are deployed. They can be deployed in a more defensive posture and a more offensive posture, which is always one of the challenges. I need not offer this to you, given your public service and experience. So it could go either way, depending on the posture and the operational utilization.
So in 2014, we did not provide any kind of lethal aid to Ukraine. It was reported at the time and since then that President Obama thought it would be too provocative, that he even said that we're not going to risk a nuclear war or World War III over Ukraine. In retrospect, do you think one of the specific mistakes made in 2014 was not providing systems like Javelin anti-tank weapons to Ukraine?
Senator, I believe that one of the lessons I learned is that it would have been appropriate and necessary to provide Ukraine with what it needed to defend its territory, including the weapons you suggest.
Because the last administration provided Ukraine with javelins, and we didn't have World War III or nuclear war yet.
Senator, you are correct.
Okay. Mr. Plumb, I have a question for you about potential negotiations with Russia. There have been some reports about the prospect of trading away the Aegis Ashore system in Romania, either removing it or reducing its presence as a bargaining chip with Russia. Some arguments that those systems could destabilize more than stabilize. Would you support removing or reducing the Aegis Ashore system in Romania?
Thanks for that question, Senator. I am unaware of that particular line of concern. I was actually instrumental in the Obama administration in establishing Aegis Ashore in Romania, and I guess I'd say I'd be very hesitant to try to use it as a bargaining chip without understanding the full security context.
I understand. Not exactly in the space policy domain, but it's complementary of a lot of those efforts. Thank you. Ms. Dalton, you'll have responsibility in part for our southwest border. Do you think it's a greater danger to the American people's prosperity and security that there are 100,000 Russians on Ukraine's border, or 2 million illegal migrants having crossed our southwestern border in the last year?
Senator, thank you for highlighting both of these challenges and the scope of the security environment that we find ourselves in at present. If confirmed, I would look forward to addressing the challenges specifically on the southwest border, working very closely with the Department of Homeland Security and other interagency counterparts and local authorities. As discussing with Senator Inhofe earlier, I do believe it's a serious challenge.
Okay, thank you. Well, I hope you get some bright ideas for how to solve that problem, since it seems like most other parts of the administration so far have failed in that challenge. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Now, via WebEx, let me recognize Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dalton, the recent Log4j, SolarWinds, and Treasury Department hacks show how challenging cyber intrusions can be on our national security, and we'll continue to see these threats continue and elevate into 2022. The office you're nominated for has in the past overseen the Defense Critical Infrastructure Program, DCIP. Do you think DCIP is up to date in its ability to provide solutions in the event of cyber or technological harm done to our critical infrastructure? Further, do you see ways where DCIP can improve its work with the private sector and civilian institutions?
Senator, thank you for highlighting this challenge, and this would be among the top priorities that I would plan to tackle if confirmed in this portfolio, because I do believe that we need to look at the appropriate frameworks, policies, approaches, and tool sets to be able to address state-based threats to our critical infrastructure that unfortunately have been manifesting over the last number of years. So if confirmed, would certainly look forward to working with the Department of Homeland Security, Cybercom, with, if confirmed, Dr. Plumb's office overseeing the DASD cyber policy to ensure that we have the right approaches to understand the threat, and to be able to provide the appropriate level of protection and resilience necessary to address that challenge. Thank you.
As a follow-up, can you speak to how you view the staffing and personnel challenges that the government faces when it comes to cybersecurity and tech expertise? I've repeatedly heard about cybersecurity and tech staffing deficiencies across government agencies, including at the DoD. What plans do you have for improving the recruitment, training, and retention of high-quality cyber and tech expertise at the department? And will you work with my office on issues regarding cyber and tech personnel?
Senator, thank you for highlighting this. I know there's been a number of external studies looking at this challenge as well the last number of years, and I do agree that we need to remain focused on bringing in talent from academia, from the tech sector, more broadly from the private sector, to really build within our ranks. I think there's also considerable capacity within the National Guard, given their career day jobs as well, that we can be better harnessing. And so absolutely have confirmed, would look forward to working with you and your team to advance those goals.
Mr. Plumb, as ASD for space policy, part of your duties will include coordinating our space policy and other agencies. What is your strategy for coordinating with our other agencies like the State Department's Office of Space Affairs to ensure that we are maintaining our leadership and promoting our values in space?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Absolutely think that promoting values in space, including norms and rules of behavior, and helping lead the international community towards that is important. State Department, in my view, and they should be the lead on these issues at the UN, DoD, and support, and I'd work closely with my state counterparts and across the interagency to coordinate that type of messaging and efforts.
I'm concerned that our lack of international agreements barring conventional weapons in space has led to a space arms race that threaten our civil and commercial space systems in space. Will you play a role in developing international norms about the use of weapons in space and adhere to them while developing this policy?
Senator, thank you. I do agree that the need for norms and rules of behavior in space is absolutely essential. I think one of the issues that makes space unique is that destructive tests like the Russians have recently conducted challenges access to all spacefaring nations, and we need to find ways to prevent that type of problem.
And how will your organization work across the department to effectively manage the threat of anti-satellite capabilities demonstrated by our adversaries, as you mentioned?
Senator, I think that anti-satellite capabilities, obviously on the tip of our minds right now based on the Russian test recently, absolutely essential to find a way through that. I think one of the best ways the department could pursue to nullify that type of behavior is a architecture that's resilient enough to withstand a blow to one or several satellites. And so I think being able to reconstitute quickly and having a resilient architecture makes the attractiveness of a target much less. And I think that's a really important place, and I don't think we're moving fast enough, and we need to get going.
Dr. Wallander, in my last few moments, we've heard reports of Russia conducting numerous cyber attacks against Ukrainian citizens, to include directly threatening Ukrainian soldiers and their families through text messages. What role can your office play in supporting the Ukrainian government in countering those malicious activities?
Senator, thank you for highlighting that Russian activities are not merely the apparent ones of conventional military force concentrations, but actually cover a spectrum of aggressive attacks and efforts to disable Ukrainian resistance and resilience itself. If confirmed, I would look forward to working with Dr. Plumb's team, if confirmed, in focusing on countering Russian cyber operations, in which public reporting is we have had some successes in the last few years, and we need to build on the capabilities and the experience that DoD has already implemented in order to effectively help Ukraine resist those kinds of attacks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Now, let me recognize via WebEx Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Wallander, I want to come to you. You were the Russia director at NSC at the time when things were happening in Eastern Europe, much like they are right now, including Russia's invasion of Crimea and the separatists that were there, the fomenting of the separatists in the Donbass. So what parallels, very quickly, do you see between that time and currently what we are seeing with the Russian buildup on the Ukrainian border?
Senator, thank you for that question. I think it's an extremely important question. And very briefly, in 2014, the Russians tried to pretend it wasn't Russian forces invading Crimea or infiltrating and operating in the Donbass. They sought a form of implausible deniability in order to invade Ukraine. The difference is right now that facade of covert operation has been pulled away, and what we're seeing is direct threats and a direct massing of Russian forces.
Now, let me ask you this. Following on with that, when you look at Russian leadership and Russian society, what parallels are you seeing between then and now? Because to us, it looks as if they're following much of the same pattern.
Senator, I agree with you, and it's very concerning because the Kremlin used its operations and its falsehoods about Ukraine to ramp up Russian domestic anger at Ukraine, at the United States and NATO, and we are exactly seeing the same kind of efforts and operations to create that kind of false narrative that Russia is defending itself against American and NATO influence in Ukraine, when what Russia is doing is assaulting Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Well, I agree with you that what Putin is trying to do is to test that resolve with NATO and with the U.S. So do you support a continued robust EUCOM exercise schedule to really support our allies and deter this aggression?
Senator, I do. A robust exercise calendar not only enhances interoperability and capabilities, and that's important for deterrence and defense, but it signals
that. Increasing our lethal assistance, our cyber, our intel support, where are you there?
Senator, I believe that the heightened Russian threat and its willingness to deploy those forces and to sable rattle requires a reevaluation of Ukraine's defense and military needs. And if confirmed, I would focus on that and take appropriate lessons.
All right, and the EFPs, I had the opportunity to visit some of our Tennessee troops that were there on an EFP mission in Poland. And so where, as the NSC director for Russia at the time, did you support the EFPs? Do you believe they should be supported today? Should we continue this participation?
Senator, I do support that framework for enhancing American presence and contributions to the security and operations of our partners and allies, especially our allies in the instance that you cite in Poland.
Well, if Russia invades Ukraine, should we establish more of the EFP battle groups and push further south?
Senator, I agree with you that if Russia further invades Ukraine, we need to reevaluate NATO posture, including U.S. contributions to NATO posture. And I would look at exactly the issues that you highlighted in your question, because I think they are key. And in principle, I would support a increased American, at least rotational presence in the region.
I'm going to run out of time, but I did want to ask you about the parallels that you see between Russian and Chinese interest in the Ukraine. If you could speak to that.
Well, I believe, Senator, that Russia and China share a priority goal of undermining the U.S.-led network of norms and rules that govern global security and ensure the security of so many countries. And so while China may not have a direct stake in Russia's aggression against Ukraine, I believe China watches carefully when the United States and when the international community do not stand up to the principles of the UN Charter and do not defend the rights of countries to choose their own futures, including their alliances.
I will submit some questions to you and Dr. Plumb dealing with nuclear presence and the nuclear posture review. And thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Kane, please.